Hi, Chris. You might want to turn your video off. And then we're just going to have everybody have their video off. If you want to talk, please communicate through the chat. I'll be watching that. Thank you so much. So you know everyone is coming in and getting settled and getting breakfast. And then we'll start in just a moment. Thank you.
We're not starting, but I do grab food and coffee, fill up coffee cups, and find a place to take. Also in the front, if you haven't signed in, do that as well. And there's a handout as well, so we want that for the presentation. And we'll start in about 5 minutes. For the folks online, just want to give you a heads up, we'll be beginning in about 5 minutes.
One of the online people said that Jen's audio sounded pretty rough.
What do you mean by rough? I'll check it out.
That's all they said.
Okay.
Quick check. Audio 1.
Okay, good morning. Good morning. Good morning. This is supposed to be a call and response, sort of. Good morning. Wow. It's Friday. We're supposed to be like happy and energetic. It's the weekend. Hey, thank you for coming out today. We really appreciate you being here. This is a really good time to be an advocate for traditional public schools and specifically Kansas City Public Schools. So before I jump into some super brief remarks, I want to acknowledge other board members who are here. So we've got our treasurer, Mr. Manny Abarca. We've got our vice chair and the chair of our government relations committee, Jennifer Wolfsey, here. And we've got our finance committee chair and board member, Rita Cortez, here as well. So we've got a majority of the board, so we can't talk business because then it would be a meeting and we'd have to notice it and all this stuff. But thank you guys for being here as well, fellow board members. And obviously we've got our interim superintendent, Dr. Collier, here and some of her team members. So thank you for being here, and thank each one of you for being here and being willing to be an advocate. If you think about what is happening in public education broadly, particularly with traditional public schools, and you think about the last couple of years, it's been a really dynamic and challenging time on a variety of fronts. And I think this district has done an incredible job navigating some really tough circumstances. I mean, in the midst of a global pandemic, this district navigated that environment very effectively. Now, we know that there's been learning loss across populations of kids around the world, but that was some of the stuff that you really couldn't control, and we were trying to make decisions in real time. And so I would just say the way in which we came through COVID has been really impressive. The other thing is, on January 11th of this year, as you guys all know, we got full accreditation for the first time in a very long time. That deserves a whole lot of handshakes and standing ovations and all of that good stuff, because it took a tremendous, I'm sure it's thousands upon thousands of hours of time and commitment to our students, and not just by administration and the school board, but particularly by the students themselves and their families, to make sure that they were focused on their academic performance and their social and emotional health. And then on top of all of that, we actually had some legislative wins as well in this last legislative session. And so that has been really refreshing. And maybe now we'll be able to go on the offense and actually make some additional, Miss Wolfsey laughs. Jeff City's an interesting animal. But hopefully we'll be able to do that in this coming legislative session as well. But what we wanted to do today, and I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Wolfsey, is really talk about the ways in which your support can help us and align with our legislative priorities that this board puts forward every year for the district and the work that we're doing in Jeff City, along with our really incredible lobbyist, Barjay and Associates. And so with that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Wolfsey.
Thank you, Mr. Hogan. Welcome. I was saying to somebody earlier, this actually is one of my favorite events. I think it may be the time of the year. It may be the faces that we get to see. You guys really, I feel like, are the people that have had our backs through these last few years as we worked on not only legislative issues, but things like trying to get us back to full accreditation. And so I just want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart for always being here when we ask you to step up for Kansas City Public Schools. We see you, we recognize you, and we really do appreciate you. So, as Mr. Hogan said, my name's Jennifer Wolfsey. I think pretty much many of you in this room have seen me for many years, a parent in the district of two. One's gone now, one is a sophomore over at Paseo. And this is our 5th annual legislative breakfast, which I'm actually quite surprised. It's become an event that I think many of you put on your calendars, and I just want to put in a plug. Every year we will do this. It's always the first Friday in December. And if you're down for kids, you're welcome. You don't even need a formal invite. Bring a friend next year. So make sure you get that on your calendar for next year. I'm going to take care of a couple of housekeeping items. Most of you who have been here at the Board of Ed know down the hall are the restrooms. We have a full buffet for breakfast. And for those of you that are vegetarian, that what is that? The gravy is not meat-based. So I just want to point that out, that it's delicious and it is very good. So help yourself. This is a very informal event. So get up, grab coffee, get more food. We are also virtual. I don't think you can see it, but there are a few folks, probably about 10 folks also on Zoom listening in. So we won't see them and we won't be able to hear from them, but they can chat with us. June will be monitoring our chat box so that if they have questions as we go through today, they can also ask those. And this will be recorded. So for those of you that want to go back and watch it again, it will be posted on our YouTube channel. At this time, I have the honor and pleasure of bringing up Dr. Jennifer Collier. She's our interim superintendent. She and our chief financial officer, Erin Thompson, will be walking you through a systems overview. And some of you that have been here before, this may look familiar, but why we're doing this again today is it's kind of the backstory to a lot of what's been going on more recently. And we felt it was extremely important for us to put all the pieces of what is going on in front of you today. So Dr. Collier, I'll turn it over to you. Do you want this here? Sure. Is that easier to do the clicker?
Because I think I'm gonna just make sure I'm gonna move some of this. Yeah. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Thank you so much for being here. I have the pleasure of walking us through a system overview. And we felt like it was important that we take some time to look at the system overview. It will help tell the story around how we've gotten to where we are today. We know there are there's a lot of things happening in KCPS right now. Probably the biggest story of all is our Blueprint 2030. But we didn't just stumble upon this last year or this year. There's been a lot of work and research and analysis that has happened over the last few years that has helped bring us to this place where we recognize there are some things that we have to do in our system in order to better serve our students. So I'm going to we're going to, I guess, take a step back and glance backwards, and then we're going to come forward to where we are today. So for this system overview, it's important that you'll hear the term system throughout the presentation. When we use that term, we're referring to both KCPS schools and charter schools that are a part of this larger educational landscape. And also this will also help you understand where KCPS in particular is situated within that. So the purpose of the system analysis, we have been a choice system for a very long time. Even prior to charter schools coming on, about 30 years ago, we were in magnet schools. And so choice has for a very long time been a part of who we are. And so we thought it was important around 2017 to do some type of analysis or research around how this choice has impacted our school system. And so that's what led to this work. I think prior to that, there were a lot of assumptions, a lot of anecdotal statements and, and guesses around what we think was happening. But this system analysis that we engaged in 2017 helped really provide some of that solid empirical data that helped, number one, helped us see us understand where we are, how we were operating, where we had inefficiencies, and then it also laid out some indications around steps we needed to make in order to improve the overall system. Here you see, and some of this this data is dated, so a lot of it you'll see is from 2019, 2018, and we're working now to update this analysis. But at this time, you can see that This map here is sort of a visual depiction of where all the schools in our system are geographically located. Everything is color coded. The color coded for the zones was actually a map that laid out where all of our high schools were located at one time. But you can see the KCPS buildings are in blue, the circles, triangles, and squares, and then the charters are in the red. So you can just kind of get a visual picture of where all the schools in this larger system are located. This here is a really important piece of information and data as we look at the larger system. As you can see, a starting point for us was about 1991 and starting at about 34,527 students. And over time, we have the enrollment in the larger system has declined about 20% from that time till now. But then you're able to see KCPS, which is the blue line, how over time there's been a consistent decline in enrollment within the KCPS school district. And then that orange line are the charters. And you can see over time, there's been a gradual increase in enrollment. I think another important event to consider in this equation as we think about the decline of enrollment for the entire system. In about 2008 or 2009, there was Independence annexed several of our schools. Through that annexation, KCPS lost, or the system lost, about approximately 3,000 students in that. So that would also be a part of that larger 20% of the decline in enrollment. And this is particularly important because we know that enrollment is one of those critical factors that really helps us determine the sustainability of our school system and our programs. Also, in that system overview analysis that was done, we kind of knew it already, but it was very clear that even within just KCPS, there was a lot of fragmentation around grade configurations. We have grade configurations K6. We have some pre-K through 6. We have some 7th, 8th grade buildings. We have some 6, 8 buildings. We have some 7, 12 buildings. We have some K8 buildings. So you can see there's a variation. And then also layered into that are also our choice schools, or what we call our signature schools. And sometimes this is challenging for families as they're trying to navigate the system, understanding what are the entry points, where are the exit points. For some of our choice schools, there are admissions criteria around you need to enter by a certain grade. So if you haven't already entered our system by a certain grade level, then you wouldn't be able to enter some of our choice schools. For example, like our foreign language immersion. Obviously, if you're coming in 4th and 5th grade, you probably wouldn't be able to enter because those students in that cohort have been immersed in that language since kindergarten and 1st grade. So those are some of the challenges. And we see that as well with the Montessori. You can't enter after the kindergarten year. And so if you have not already come into our system or been a part of that program, then that would not be an option. And so that is sometimes a frustration for our families as they're considering how are they mapping out and planning schooling for their children. We know predictability is really important for families. And so this is one of the things that we discovered through this study, which is a part. And so then I want to also tie some of this to where we are today. So when we talk about Blueprint 2030, we're talking about overhauling and creating clearer grade configurations so everyone can understand that, and also establish more feeder-like patterns so that families have some idea of, as they're planning schooling for children, where their children will attend. Here you see the same thing with charters. They're very similar to us in terms of the grade configurations and lacking feeder patterns. And we understand that because they are all separate LEAs of their own, but this has also become a challenge for them. And what we have discovered is that some of them have started to try to resolve that issue in and of themselves. Those schools that are on the left end there, many of those schools have now expanded from elementary and created middle and high school so that they can sort of create that predictability and pathway for their students and their families. So they are also recognizing that as an issue. So when we talk about school choice, there are several options for students when we say that they are a choice student. These are students who may have chosen charter, families that have chosen charter schools. There are also families that perhaps have chosen signature schools within the Kansas City public school district. And then there are also students who may be in a neighborhood school, but it may not be their home school. And that can happen for various reasons. Sometimes there is an overflow. A particular school has capped out their enrollment at a certain grade level. And so that student must then go to another school that is not their neighborhood school, or it could be a programming issue. A student needs some kind of specialized program as special education or ELL. And those are some things that would perhaps take them out of their neighborhood. So here looking at enrollment again, and once again, this is a really critical piece because once again, this helps us determine the sustainability of our school system, what we're able to offer. We know funding is based on this. And so you can look at in school year 2010, what the enrollment looked like, how it was broken down. And at that time, the majority of students were in KCPS neighborhood schools. At that time, we had 19% in signature, and then charter made up about 35% of students in the system. By 2018, you can see that drastically changed. Only 40% were in neighborhood schools. There was also decline in our signature schools in terms of enrollment, down to 13%. But I think what is really telling here is that charter schools increased significantly in enrollment at 47%. And that was once again as of 2018. And so the charter schools increased about 42% in enrollment. As of today, when we look at current data, we're looking roughly about 50-50 for KCPS district and 50% for charters in terms of enrollment. So we thought it was also important to sort of get a picture of what would perhaps be typical for a school system about the same size as our larger system. And once again, when we say system, we're referring to both KCPS and charter schools. And so looking at about 26,000 students, what we have and what we're offering is about 17 high school options, 21 middle school options, 44 elementary. There are 4 charter sponsors. Those are KCPS is a sponsor for charters, University of Missouri, University of St. Louis, and the Commission. So there are 4 charter sponsors currently in the Kansas City area. But then also look, there are 21 charter school operators, and those are almost like mini school districts within this larger system. And so when we look at this comparison, this is Springfield Public Schools, approximately or pretty close to the same number of students. You can clearly see the difference there in terms of the number of school options that are provided. And so when I say typical, I'm talking about Springfield. Now, I do want to note, because people always say, well, they're very different than KCPS. Yes, they are. We recognize that. They are different than us demographically, but they are very similar to us in terms of assessed valuation. And so we do use this as a model to look and make a comparison around and really better understand just how inefficient we are as a system. When we look at the number of buildings and the options that we are providing, what this says to us is that the money that is coming into this system is being exacerbating. It is being spread very thinly across our system in order to fund all of these. Once again, when you go back to the 21 charter school operators, we have to remember that they have their own boards, they have their own central office, they have their own transportation, food service, custodial services, and all of those are dollars that are spent and monies that could be going into classrooms. And so when we look at the system, I'm not just talking about charters, the larger system here, we know that there are great inefficiencies that we have to address collectively. And then here we are looking at school size, and what we learned from our study, and we continue to see that our schools are smaller than the desired school size range. And just to note, when we talk about this desired school size range, those ranges were determined through the 2016 KCPS master plan, but even those sizes are smaller than national standards. But these are the sizes that we thought were most appropriate for us. And the majority of our schools are falling below that. 57% of all schools within the system are falling below that range. And so when we think about school size, that really speaks to what you're able to offer programmatically to students. when schools are extremely small, it impacts the number of electives that are provided, and even the robust academic pathways that could be in schools, you aren't able to achieve that. And so that is why we are looking really closely right now as we're going through this Blueprint 2030 conversation. Unfortunately, so much has been lost in it, and it's a focus more on closure. But I just want to remind everyone that the purpose of Blueprint 2030 is not just closure. We're looking at how we can better serve our students academically, how we can improve the outcomes for our students, and how we also can enhance that student experience. But we can only do that if we look at how we are currently utilizing our resources and then redirect them to the programming. And those small school sizes make it very difficult for us to achieve that. So this is something that we have to address, and this is why we are where we are as a school system going through this Blueprint 2030 process. Here, this is looking at high schools, and in particular, once again, you can see the number of students Springfield has and what we have, and then look at the average building size, the number of students in those buildings. And I think our data has actually been updated because I think that was based on about 15 high schools. And I did the math last night, so our average, the average enrollment size in buildings is actually around 360. And so once again, these small school sizes makes it very difficult to provide the kind of programming that we want. And it's almost unheard of to have electives split between schools and high schools. But we have some high schools that are so small that not only are we splitting electives, music, art, PE for elementary, we're also doing that at some of our high schools that are really small. And so once again, this limits the offerings that we could be providing for our students when we maintain schools at that size. And it really is just unfair to children. And so while we know that there's a lot of concern and passion around closing schools, there are a lot of good valid reasons why people feel that we should leave schools open. It really is, it's challenging. And I just want to say, I don't want to get on a soapbox, but there are a lot of things that have led us to this place. And it's unfortunate that I feel like the responsibility is being laid at the feet of the Kansas City public school system. A lot of societal community issues that have not been addressed, a lot of any inequities that have not been addressed. I'm not going to go into all of them right now, but they have not been addressed. And it is not until KCPS says, hey, we're going to step in as the leader in this. We're going to make a difficult decision. This is hard. It's painful. I told a group just yesterday or the other day when we met with them, I've worked in this district this is my 23rd year. I was a teacher in this district. I taught 10 years. I'm not talking about what I think. I know I spent 10 years in our classrooms teaching, and I care about our schools. One of the schools that's on the list to close is Northeast High School. That was my school. I will always be a Viking. And Jordan Gordon, who's sitting at the table, our Chief Human Resource Officer, was one of my students at Northeast High School. We care about Northeast High School. And even though we have a lot of concern and care, we know that we just can't continue down this road, not addressing some of these critical issues and making sure that we're providing the kind of educational experiences that our children need. And we can't do that with school sizes like that. And so this is, once again, I want to make sure we're making the connections around this study, what we've learned, and then how we are trying to respond to some of these issues. At this time, we're going to have our phenomenal Chief Financial and Operations Officer, Erin Thompson, is going to come forward and take us through some of the financial implications, and then I'll come back. Okay, I stopped. Okay, changing anyway.
I won't be as exciting as Dr. Collier. I'm going to go through a high level of the finance for the district. Of course, enrollment drives the budget. As you see, from 2000, when charter schools started, our enrollment has decreased here in the Kansas City Public Schools. We use enrollment to project the budget for classroom teachers, vice principals, all staff at the schools, staff, also administrative staff. So enrollment drives the budget. This year, as you see, our enrollment did do a slight increase because we received accreditation. We went up about 254 students. This is our current year budget. Most of we kind of went through where the money comes from. Most of our money comes from property taxes. 57% comes from property taxes. We have our Prop C at 7%, local at 2%, county at 2%, state at 4%, and federal at 28%. Those are those ESSER dollars as a part of our budget this year. It really helped us to get those federal ESSER dollars. Well, those dollars end in FY24, next school year. Those dollars will end. And we got a total of 106 million in ESSER dollars to help us through the COVID learning loss. Where the money goes, most of our money goes on people, salaries and benefits. That's what runs the school district, people. As you see, we have capital outlay. This is all our operating budget. We have to use our operating budget to do the maintenance in the buildings. So total expenditures are 332,663,581. That's our current budget. That was our current budget that the board approved. Revenue is less than expenditures. So we designate some of our reserves to help us with our capital outlay. We are under the Hancock Act for our tax levy, which is the 4.9599. That's our tax levy. Under Hancock, we would only get $2.40. Under DSEG, they knew we could not operate with $2.40 for a school district. So a statewide mandate under Article 10 of the Missouri Constitution added additional amounts so we could have the $4.9599 to operate. That is only for operations. It doesn't cover capital outlay, large maintenance projects that come along on 100-year-old buildings. So we did a comparison for you. Our debt, without debt service, we're number 4.9599. That's operations. But if we do a GO bond, like the other districts have done, we're dropped down to number 2. So that is really stressing out our operating budget because we have a lot of deferred maintenance that we cannot address just using the operating funds. And this shows our actual inefficiency in this system, the whole system. We're spending, Springfield spends about 162 million. The whole system of Kansas City, we're spending almost 200 million on instruction. On the bus transportation, that shows more. Springfield, 9.2. We have to spend almost 8 million more in this system for buses because we have so many educational systems running in Kansas City. And plant maintenance, what we're spending on our buildings compared to Springfield. Because we have so many buildings open. So it just shows how our resources are spread very thin here. And Kansas, the whole system of education system in Kansas City. Very short.
Thank you, Erin. So once that it truly speaks to why, and I know you've heard conversations that we are considering going for a bond, why we need to do that, because we can't continue to take from the operational budget monies that could be going into classrooms to actually patch up, as Erin said, 100-year-old buildings. You only can patch up so long. And the fact that we've had to do that since 1967 is just unthinkable. And at some point, something has to give. And so we believe it's time now that we move forward. We've regained our full accreditation, and we believe it's time to go for a bond. And I've been saying that our children deserve new buildings. And I get it, new buildings is not the full story. It requires people that care about our kids, that want to educate our children. But I do think it sends a message to our kids around their value. I don't like that our kids have to go visit other school systems, neighbors, and walk into amazing buildings and wonder to themselves why they can't have that kind of building. That should never happen. And most communities don't allow that to happen. And so I think it's time for this community to say no more. It's time for us to demonstrate just how important our children are to us and demonstrate how much we value them by putting our money where our mouth is. I hear a lot of talking, but we need a lot of support for our children, and we need for people to demonstrate that through a bond. The other thing is looking at that previous slide here. We know that we're in a system, once again, KCPS and charters, and we know charters aren't going anywhere. And I want to be very clear, we're not trying to make charters go anywhere. We understand they're here. So we know that we can't continue to operate like this. So it behooves all of us to figure out how can we work through some of these issues together. And that's what led us then to the creation of our Ed Collaboration Department. Oh, I'm going the wrong direction. I was like, wait a minute, why am I so far away from where this Ed Collaboration Department? During this time, as we completed the study, we felt like it was important for KCPS to invest dollars into a person or an office that would help us figure out how to navigate through some of these issues and begin conversations with charters so that we start to work together more so that we can better serve our community. And some people said, well, why would you want to work with the charters? But we have to remember that this is not about us as adults. This is about the children that we're serving in this community. And we want to make sure that the educational experiences are good for all children in this community. And quite frankly, as KCPS, as the mother school system, we feel responsible for all the children in this system, whether they're with us or with charters. And so we know that we have to engage in really critical conversations. They're not easy, but we are committed to this work, and we have been since the start of our Ed Collaboration Office. And so at that time, the board and administration worked to develop at least 5 key objectives that we could focus on in this work. What would help guide us in some of the partnerships and guide that work. And from those objectives, we also identified several ideas or actions that would go along with those in order to get buy-in from all the stakeholders in the system.
John, any thoughts?
So here are those
you want to
objectives.
share, John Sharp,
One was
about
number one, just raising awareness, all the information that came out with the system analysis, making sure that people were knowledgeable and aware. And we had several engagement sessions around that time when that study was completed to make sure that our community was educated. We had not gone back to revisit this in a while. And so I think as we're having these Blueprint 2030 conversations, we know that we have to go back and revisit this. We're aware of it, but I think some people who are now joining the conversation, they're not fully aware of all of this and how we got to where we are. We also know that we have to work to reach some kind of consensus and create a more coordinated, cohesive system. And we have to do that together. We want to improve trust in the community between and with our community and between KCPS charters and the community working together. Once again, this is a process. It's not something that's happened overnight. It's not something that is completed. I don't know if you ever complete it, but we continue to work toward that end. Also working to create and establishing a framework for developing that coordinated, cohesive system and doing that collectively. And then also, if you remember in our strategic plan, we often say it, schools can't do it alone, really getting that support, cross-sector support from our community to help us become better as a school system, stronger, equitable, and sustainable. And so I'm not going to read through all of these to you, but there were some really clear board principles that helped that help guide this work around how we partner, when we partner, and what are the things that we're looking at to determine if partnership is appropriate, and then at what level. And I think you all have these notes, so I'm not going to read through all of them. So here you can see the collaboration opportunities are broken into tiers. We understand that there are different degrees of collaboration that folks would want. And so that first tier is really just around sharing best practices. I know Sharnissa Holiday Scott, who leads this office and who's also currently our interim chief of staff, she has ongoing meetings with all charter leaders and superintendent of KCPS to just have conversations, to share ideas, to work through some issues together and to provide solutions. And so that has worked really well over these years. Tier 2 is more around contracting for services. And we currently work with some charters to contract services to help some of that inefficiency, to drive down costs. I know we are working with a couple of charter schools on transportation, and that's helped lower the costs for them and for us. And then also we have partnered with some of them on food service. And so where we can see that we can do that to help both systems, we have. And then that deeper partnership is more of It's more like where we are sponsors. I said earlier, there are 4 charter sponsors for Kansas City. KCPS is one of those sponsors. We currently sponsor 3 charter schools. Those are Allen Village, Crossroads, and Gordon Parks Elementary. Those are the 3 schools that we sponsor. All right, so moving into Blueprint 2030. I talked about it earlier, the purposes around Blueprint 2030, and once again, just centering back on that our primary objectives around increasing academic achievement, enhancing student experience, which then leads to some of those decisions that we have to make around school consolidations and closures in order to redirect resources to instruction and programming. Some of the benefits of Blueprint 2030, we could potentially redirect up to $13.2 million back into the academic vision, into the classrooms. We've talked a lot about the project-based learning, which I think is critical. It really changes the way instruction happens in the classroom, more hands-on, experiential for kids, working together to solve some real-world issues and to answer complex problems and questions that exist, and really allowing kids to lead in their own learning. And I think this is essential. We serve a student body and that wants autonomy and they want to lead. And we can't just continue to teach in the ways that we have. And I do want to say, when I say that, I don't want to send a message that none of this is happening in our classrooms, because we have some really good teachers that are doing some of this work. But what we want to make sure that is not hit and miss or here or there. We want to make sure that this is a district-wide practice. We've also talked about the world language beginning at elementary. We had a presentation the other evening from our teacher, one of our teachers at Paseo, who's helped us expand our world dual language programming. What we found is students at Carver and FLA, when they left those buildings, oftentimes they felt like they had no other option in order to continue their world language studies. Well, we've now expanded that into Paseo, and we currently have 25% of our 7th, 8th, and 9th grade students at Paseo are students in that dual language program. And so they'll be able to continue through that throughout high school, and that is amazing. But to be able to expand world language across our system, exposing students as early as kindergarten would be amazing, especially as we work to make sure that our students are globally competitive. STEAM in the elementary, we already have STEM through our iSparks programming, but infusing the arts, introducing instrumental music at the elementary and secondary level. And then those college and career pathways are going to be really critical to our secondary students as we try to make sure that they are really exposed to a number of career pathways and have experiences that prepare them to actually further engage in those career and college choices once they leave KCPS. And then I have to say, I'm always really excited about beyond the 4 walls learning experiences. I think that it's so important that our children have opportunities to learn outside of our school and to explore all the great learning opportunities that exist within our community and in the larger setting in the nation. And so we have plans for ensuring that every student is guaranteed 2 field trips 2 field trips a year. It doesn't mean that they won't have others, because when we've said that, people have said only 2 field trips. We just want to make sure they at least have 2 field trips that are tied to the curriculum, tied to what they're learning in the classroom, where they get a chance to go out and explore and experience learning in a different way. There's a lot that's a part of the academic vision, and while we love all of it, we know that it's not feasible or wise to try to do all of it at one time. We know it's possible to do good things and do it in the wrong way, and we don't intend to do that. So what we have done is mapped out a tentative plan for how we want to roll out this programming. And we're continuing to look at this, especially as we look at what we're able to do in terms of redirecting resources, what is I guess feasible for our community, how much our community can digest at one time in order for us to do this well. So we have a plan for how we are going to roll this out over a series of years. And once again, that implementation is really based on our ability to redirect the resources that we have currently going into operational things back into this academic vision. So from the facility summary, what I think everyone is probably aware of this piece here. The initial proposal that was brought forth on October 12th, it's for 27 of our 37 operating schools to continue to remain operational. 10 of those schools are recommended for some type of closure or conversion. 6 of those buildings would be surplus sites and be placed into our repurposing process. And then 4 buildings we're looking to retain for KCPS use. We're also looking at possibly 3 schools recommended for recreation or significant renovation over a period of years. Oh, okay. So I think here we are at our 2023 legislative priorities, and I'm going to bring forward Jennifer Wolfsey. You all heard from her earlier.
Appreciate that. That was a lot. So I will ask you, we have Q&A built in after legislative priorities, but I'm just kind of looking at nods of heads. Do you want to do any Q&A now, or would you rather hear priorities real quick and then do it after where you can talk about everything? Okay, I'm getting blank stares. So we're going to go ahead and move on. It's okay. We'll move on to legislative priorities. So one of the things I want to do before I go through this is I'd like to recognize my other board colleague, Dr. Marvia Jones, sitting over here in the lovely yellow dress. Thank you for coming. And there is one person who is online that you cannot see, but we absolutely need to recognize. And his name is Chris Ropey. He is our lobbyist in Jefferson City. He works with John Barget and Associates, a wonderful organization that I actually think we would not be as successful as we are down in the state capitol if not for John Barget, Chris Ropey, Erica Leonard, the full team that does such a great job of representing Kansas City public schools year in and year out. So I just want to give a big shout out to Chris, who is monitoring on the call. So let's see, I forget how we did these. Okay, I'm going to go back for 1 second here. So typically with our priorities, it does take a few years to get things across the finish line. It's rare that you actually put something forward and it gets across Jefferson City in 1 year. So I'm just going to tell you a lot of these are going to look familiar, but actually after 3 years of trying to move equity funding through the legislature, we were actually successful in doing that last year. Now, it didn't look anything like what we had put together. It's one of the rare pieces of legislation that actually for 3 years, I'm seeing a lot of nods. So I know this group actually knows how challenging that was, but it's a great, I think, example of what Dr. Collier just walked through about. We wanted to work with our charter partners in Kansas City. We're really trying hard to be together on a lot of things because it really is about making things better for all students. And so this was one of those examples. And so while it didn't look at all like what we had proposed and worked on for a few years, we were still okay with it getting across. What we did learn was how important relationships are in being successful in Jefferson City. And that effort showed legislators that we can work with our charter counterparts to address something for all students. And what it did was set us up for some positive momentum going into this next legislative session. Believe it or not, in the 5 years I've kind of been doing this work as a board member, Kansas City Public Schools is actually now looked at like, well, what do they think and what are they doing and how are they working with their charter counterparts down in Jefferson City? And I think that is something that we can all be very proud of. So I will walk you through and they're on your table. They look like this, the 4 legislative priorities that the board and administration have worked on. The first one is teacher compensation. We've carried it on through. We want to make sure that we are not just working on competitive wages, but also an area that we'd like to focus on is differentiated pay in a couple of areas, hard to fill subjects, schools that are in what are called the targeted I forget what it's called, comparison or competitive category. It's on your sheet. Let's see, comprehensive. I knew it was a C. As well as in differentiated pay in charter counties, where we're actually at a bit of a disadvantage competitively when it comes to, we have a salary schedule, and that's actually a good thing, but it actually puts us at a competitive disadvantage sometimes because our charter counterparts do not have that same limitation. So that is one of the things that we'd like to look at addressing, is having that flexibility to remain competitive as it relates to teacher salaries. I'm actually going to skip forward because I want to leave transparency and accountability as my last talking point. And as far as pre-K goes, we also want to see pre-K funded basically through the foundation formula, and that we would like to see DESE, the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, be the agency overseeing that pre-K programming, mainly to ensure that all students are going to be kindergarten ready, no matter where they are statewide. Okay, I'm coming back to this one, and I don't think I'll jump back to the slide from, it was Ms. Thompson regarding Hancock, but I do want people to understand why this is on here, because this one's a fairly complicated one. I'm going to try to make it very basic. So the Hancock Amendment, Kansas City Public Schools is the only district in the state not under this amendment. This amendment is actually a good thing for all other school districts. And let me explain why. It protects property owners, because when property values fluctuate, it has a cap for property owners, but it also protects school districts because it has a bottom so that school districts' revenues are also protected. So it protects both property owners and school districts. It's actually a good thing because the revenue can only remain within a certain band. However, Kansas City Public Schools not being under that means we're in a very different situation. So the example I'll give you is, remember in 2007-8 when we had the recession and home values really declined. Kansas City Public Schools, imagine your revenue going, here's your revenue. There's no band to protect property owners or us. So our revenue really dipped down. And, but the thing that didn't happen at that time, expenses did not go down for us. Salaries kept going up, utility expenses kept going up, but our revenues were bottomed out. Do you know that we did not get back to the revenues of 2008 until the 2019 school year? That is a lot of lost revenue. If I had the number in my head, I would tell you, because it is astounding. And so this is why we have this as a priority. This is a priority that will actually take multiple steps to get us under the Hancock Amendment, because it would actually require a statewide vote. So, and 3 or 4 steps before that. So know that this one's on here because we have a lot of work to do as Kansas City Public Schools. We want to use that positive momentum that we got coming out of the last session to start to educate some of the legislators about why this would actually be good. One of our biggest fears is that there would be legislation that would actually put us under Hancock at the wrong time, because once you're in there, you are stuck at that level. You can only go up and down 5%. So it is very imperative that we make sure we enter Hancock at the right point in time. So let's go backwards, I believe, to transparency and accountability. So this one really ties to a lot of what we've been talking to as far as our overarching system and how are we going to go about working with folks to try to make that system work for all students. One of the ways that we believe we can do that is through focusing on making this how do we say it, the system itself, which is very difficult to navigate if you're a family, or difficult to really understand how to make it accountable to families and to taxpayers if you're a taxpayer. How do we get there? We think transparency and accountability and working on the framework that our schools and charter counties work under, that's the way we do that. Some of the things that we would like to advocate for in this area are assigning accreditation ratings to all schools in charter counties, advocating for the same operational requirements in these systems that have charters. So an example would be, we should all probably have the ability to have flexible start dates. That's one of the things that we'll be working on this legislative session. The annual reporting of financial information. To me, this one's really simple, but it's one of the best ways for taxpayers to understand how their dollars are being used in these systems. And right now, we're not all playing by the same rules. We don't have a level playing field. Kansas City Public Schools, really, we are an open book. If you want to go find a contract, if you want to go there, it's all on our website. It's all under Assembly. You can go see all that information. You could see if we did have debt service, you could go see it. But we think that all folks receiving public dollars should have the same requirements. And one of the last ones is maybe even for advocating for efficient school systems. We'd like to see that by requiring viability studies before the expansion of seats in areas where in charter counties. Let's see. Okay, so, I do want to, before we go into Q&A, we do at this breakfast tend to focus on state legislative priorities, but we don't just play in that realm. I think you guys are very aware of the fact that we have had a presence at the city level for quite a few years. When we're talking about our local or city priorities, the areas that we focus on are affordable housing, incentive, I wouldn't say incentive reform, it's just the use of incentives, reasonable use of incentives. And because those are where, as Ms. Thompson pointed out, where a majority of our public, our revenue comes from. And then the other one that we're going to be focusing on, we moved it off of the state legislative priorities and we're moving it over to the city level, are our social emotional supports for our students and our families. We'd like to work more closely with the city and the health department on that particular priority going forward. So now that that's all been covered. So at this point, I'm looking at time. What's left is a little bit of Q&A, open mic time. And then I'd like to end by bringing up my board colleague, Ms. Rita Cortez. We'll wrap up and end the session with an ask of you guys. But we have one mic back in the back with June, and I have a mic up here. So it's really any question is on the table if you want to ask it. So turn around, raise your hand. First question goes to Deidre Anderson. No, go ahead and if you don't mind, because we're going to try, the people on the thing can hear you better with the mic.
Well, good morning. I'm Deidre Anderson. I'm CEO of Early Start. We're a pre-K focused nonprofit. My question is not first about pre-K though. My first question is about the district's support of or prioritizing local control of the police department as well, in addition to the Hancock Amendment, because I think that has a lot to do with where you're at with your schools. And if we don't address the violence and our ability to control our community and how we police ourselves, I think that we're missing the mark. So just maybe more of a comment than a question. On the pre-K, I do wonder though, beyond legislation, opportunities for more meaningful and creative ways to partner with organizations like myself, not just through what's already being done with the pre-K cooperative, but there's a statewide network of providers that are of all kinds of types that may not be delivering what the district would see as a true preschool program, but infant care and all that long before kids go to pre-K impacts all of you. And so just really wondering how you see the community playing out and coordinating and supporting you in the pre-K expansion opportunities and efforts.
I think you just kind of need to stay
Yeah.
far enough so we don't need feedback.
Okay, that's a very good question. And one of the things that I would like to do, and I think I discovered through this Blueprint 2030 process, is that we need a lot more engagement with our community to have conversations around a number of items. And one of those is the academic programming. And I don't think that we should try to make these decisions in isolation. We believe that pre-K is very important. We want to expand that across our system. And we've been saying that for several years. And so we know that partnerships with organizations like yours and others will help us achieve that. And so I think as we move forward, we want to further engage, have conversations, and really think through how we can responsibly expand pre-K programming across our system. But once again, I don't think it's something we want to do in isolation. We want to bring in various stakeholders to help us in these kinds of conversations, and to be very transparent, because the school system is not just ours, the employees that are here, it belongs to the community. And so we want to bring you all into that conversation and help us think through those things and make some really critical decisions that will help us sustain this over time.
Yeah, Joe Robertson with Link. And so in the Hancock Amendment situation, that means if you got what you wanted, then there would be, in times of increasing property revenue, the district would want to roll its levy down, right?
I'm going to allow Aaron to speak to that. Aaron, come to the microphone.
That's a no. So we really have to look at this legally, of the Hancock Amendment, the language, because we're covered under Article 10 of the state Missouri Constitution. We get that additional funding to help us with our revenue for operations. So when you put the language on the ballot, we really need to look how we put that language on the ballot legally, because we ran into it before when we tried to do the language for pre-K for all. When we tried to do that, we did the polling, and it can change our revenue stream if we don't have that language correctly on that ballot. We do not want to roll back. That's definitely, we will never want to give up revenue.
Oh, I guess I can stand. Jeff Jolly, quick question. So I appreciate the having seen a lot of legislative priorities over my years. The fact that this is very narrowly tailored to very specific issues. So kudos to you all for putting it together in that way. I think two questions. One, Deidre kind of hit on one. You mentioned, Dr. Collier, kind of the societal issues that impact, obviously, our students. We work closely with Kathleen on affordable housing and incentive issues at the city level. But I'm curious, I didn't see anything about transportation. That's been an issue over the years. You know, maybe I'd just be curious kind of what your thoughts are on your transportation costs and the state's, you know, compensation thereof. And then secondly, maybe just a follow-up to Deidre's points about violence in our community and safety issues. Are there things that we can be doing as you know, supporters of the school system, you know, to kind of help to ensure that your voices are at the table when some of those safety and justice issues are being discussed, such as local control of the police department, which should have happened decades ago, and other issues?
Yes, so I'm going to just tackle the safety piece, and I'm going to let Aaron speak to the transportation. So we know that safety continues to be a concern for many parents, but for all of us in the community, and in particular here in the Kansas City area. And so we recognize, once again, some of the issues that we even see come into our schools are not just school issues. They are things that have, I guess, festered out in the community, and then they find their way into our schools, and then we have to deal with some of those issues. Once again, I think this is an area that we have to work with the community, and we do need to bring everyone to the table. If there are opportunities for KCPS to join conversations that are already happening, we would love to do that. But a part of the work that I'd like to do as we move forward is to lead in that space, because if it's not happening, then we want to create the space to bring our community together. That's another area that we want to tackle. In addition to the academics, I want us to have a task force or committees that look at safety. How do we address safety as a full community, not just KCPS doing it alone? Right now we have some really great partners that are helping us. The Center for Conflict Resolution, they're here today. They do a lot in our schools to help support us. That's an example of schools not being able to do it alone and partners stepping in to really help us improve the safety in our schools. But we know we need more support. Aside from that, we need additional support. And so we need to bring folks to the table to start having some really, I guess, honest conversations about how we can make some changes and do some things systemically to better improve safety in our schools and in our neighborhoods. So,
as to the transportation as part of the foundation formula, is never fully funded. This year was the first year was fully funded because the state had additional revenues. So that would be another item under the legislation that we would like to have it fully funded every year.
Can I add one little part to that? So, and we'll come to you next, Samara, but I want people to understand, I don't know if you'll remember back on that slide when she talked about inefficiencies, when you're spending 2x, your system is spending 2x on transportation versus another system. Again, all those dollars are going to, and we're having to fund that because it's not getting fully funded by the state. So we're funding that. Those don't get to go into the classroom. So these pieces of this puzzle are all connected, but we have to have everybody willing to help us work this issue. Go ahead.
Kathleen said I had to stand up. Good morning, everybody. Samara Crawford Herrera, Kansas City Action Fund. My question is about the bond and just a little bit more information about where you all find yourselves in the process of pursuing the bond, and then whether or not the bond will encompass, let's say, 26,000 kiddos and help to kind of ensure some more education collaboration there.
So we are in very early stages. We are looking at contracts now so that we can start some polling to get a sense of our community's I guess, desire or taste for this for a bond before we move forward. So we're in the early stages. And then in terms of how this will look for the entire KCPS system, KCPS and charters, there's some work that has to be done, thought through. So we're not in a position to say what that's going to look like, but we are aware that there has to be some work in terms of how those funds will be distributed, what percent and that kind of thing. Sharnissa Holiday Scott, who works very closely with the charters leading that ed collaboration, has already started looking into that. And so we'll be working through that and then sharing more information out with the community once we have some things solidified, but we're not at a place where we're able to really speak specifically to what that will look like.
Okay, I wanted to add to Samara's question, which is do you know if the bond would be like citywide, countywide, or like encompass of just people who live within the school district so that we can like figure out who we should be talking to about that bond?
It would be for the Kansas City boundary for this community, KCP public schools and charters.
Okay. And then my other question was about, I lost it. I'll bring it back.
Okay. We'll stick around. Oh, she thought of it.
Okay, so there
I love
are
it.
schools that we are considering rolling off. Is there a way that we're working with the city or public entities to try to keep those as public buildings and sell them directly to those public entities instead of like private developers and things like that?
They will go through our repurposing process. And so, yes, there are opportunities. We definitely want to partner with folks in the community, whatever that might look like, so that there is use of those buildings. We don't want to add to the blight that's currently in our community. So that is a priority for us as we move forward.
So let's take about three more. we'll take these next three and then we'll go to wrap up.
In terms of the state legislation implementation, just wondering what connections are we looking at for having someone sponsor the bill? Is there like a particular person or cohort that we're looking at specifically sponsoring and helping us with that language to get it passed?
That is a great question. So I wish he was here, but I did talk to him yesterday. Was the first day everything got pre-filed in the legislature. And so there, it's interesting. I think it was Mr. Hogan said, I mean, honestly, we're mostly on defense in Jefferson City. I think this is kind of the first year we've actually even thought of it. It was such an odd concept to the government relations committee. We're like, okay, we're actually going to be really, really proactive. We have, one of the things we're looking at is a bill around the start date. We're starting with things that what we found is start with what you think you can be fairly successful with, right? And so one of the areas that we wanted to focus on, because we just thought there might be some consensus, is school start date. I don't know if a lot of people realize, but there was a legislation passed a couple of years ago that school districts cannot start their school year. Is it 2 weeks prior to 10 days prior to Labor Day? Typically, we have been starting kind of second week of August. Charters can start anytime they want to. And that does not serve our families well, quite frankly, especially if you've got a student in one school and a student in ours. So we would like that same flexibility in charter counties. And that's one of the first pieces of legislation. And yes, we do have the way that it works. That's why we love our folks at John Barget. They actually work to find sponsors that, and by the way, though, we've done the hard work of building those relationships with different legislators in the House and in the Senate so that they're actually willing to carry our legislation. And so, yes, we have already begun that process with the one piece that we're looking at. Leslie.
Hi, Leslie Colmeyer with Show Casey Schools. I think KCPS has a real role to play in the conversations that we're having at the city level around non-owner occupied development property. So Kansas City has a real problem, as does every other major city in the country, with developers sweeping in, buying up land, and then using them for Airbnb and VRBO. And rental property. And I know the mayor's office right now has a survey out, but KCPS has a real role to play in that conversation, especially as it impacts enrollment for our students.
Okay.
So just asking if you're aware and are involved in the conversation.
Yes, we are. And I'm sure Kathleen would love to jump up and answer that, because she does a phenomenal job leading that work for us. So yes, we are aware. And I agree, we do need a seat at the table. So if there's opportunities for us to join that conversation in greater ways, we'd like to do that.
Hi, Julie Holland with Parent Leadership Training Institute. My question is just knowing that legislation takes a lot of organizations all rowing together to really encourage legislators to support stuff. So I'm curious, who are your other allies or advocates on your legislative priorities?
That's a great question. So thinking through the three, pre-K, Hancock, and teacher comp, and transparency and accountability, while we'd love to say we're in sync on teacher comp, I know we don't always see eye to eye. And so we've got to work with our teachers unions. We need to work with legislators that actually also want to help in these areas. But I will tell you, this is an area I think we could do a little bit better about trying to bring more people with us to the table in the area of pre-K. Hancock is its own very difficult thing. I'm not sure. I think maybe business leaders might be a good group of folks that might be willing to help undertake that from a, let's all kind of push. This is because I remember when we were going through this scary time when there was some legislation being proposed around kind of capping property taxes. And when we would talk about that with the folks in the chambers and even the civic council, they did understand how difficult that would make things for us. So I think we need to do, a better job of identifying those folks. And like Dr. Collier just said, reaching out and pulling you. It's not just this legislative breakfast, which, it checks a box, but we don't want to be just about checking boxes. We want to be about bringing people with us to the table. And so transparency and accountability, I think that's one where we're maybe doing a little bit better about trying to grab our charter counterparts. But that is an area I think we could reach out more and try to bring you with us, and not just in this one legislative breakfast. Would you like to add anything to that?
No, but I'm actually I'm going to be a questioner for the moment from online. This is a question for Dr. Collier. I think this is a great way for us to close out the question and answer session. KCPS highlighted the big push for our kids reading. Wondering Dr. Collier's reflections on how that work is going so far this semester and what she needs from folks like us to support her and our young people reading.
Very good question. That is, literacy is one of our main priorities as a school system. We felt like it was so important that we would not wait until any decisions around Blueprint 2030. We felt like it was an urgent matter. When we look at our data, we know that there is a lot of work that we have to do to ensure that our students are literate and have excellent literacy skills. And so this year we did kick off our reading campaign, which was really about elevating the importance of reading across our school system, and also modeling for our students a love for reading and helping them instill that love in them, so that they understand how important reading is to understanding themselves, seeing themselves, understanding others, and also exploring it in the world. And so that is something we started this school year. We also invested dollars into reading, and not just literacy, but it was literacy and math that we felt like it was important that we make a major investment. And so we added reading and math interventionists to all of our schools so that our students are getting the support that they need around reading. We're also currently actually getting ready to secure high dosage tutoring for, in particular, some of our lower performing schools, but tutoring for all schools, so that students are getting that targeted reading support. And so what can folks do to support us? They can continue to come into our buildings as readers. We have partnerships that would allow them to come in and spend time with students reading. They can help us with tutoring if that's something they would like to volunteer to help do. We always need dollars that will help support some of even the costs for some of the high dosage tutoring that we're trying to cover. It is quite expensive to secure high dosage tutoring, because that's looking at folks working with individual or extremely small groups of students so they can actually really get that targeted support that they need. But we feel like it's a worthwhile investment to do that. So those are the ways I think folks can partner with us right now. But also, once again, you've heard me say it, and I'm going to say it again. I think further engagement is going to be very critical as we move forward, bringing folks into these conversations. And once again, one of those areas is academics and sharing ideas, because we don't believe that the genius is only here in KCPS. It comes from the folks in the community as well, and you all partnering with us. And so sharing ideas. I just had a breakfast the other morning with someone who shared some amazing ideas around how we can approach instruction differently. And we're exploring ways to further study that and considering some of those options for our school system. So once again, as we work together, sharing ideas together through various means of support, I think we can further advance the school system and really advance learning for our children. So hopefully I answered that.
You did. Great job. Wonderful. So we're going to transition to my board colleague, Rita Cortez, who will wrap up and bring us home.
For those of you who know me, it won't surprise you that I'm a cleanup hitter. So really, at the end of these breakfasts, we always like to close with an ask. And how can you help us help our kids, our teachers, our staff, and our community? This year, we're asking you to help us encourage legislators to build greater transparency and accountability into the framework for all publicly funded K-12 schools. What does that really mean? Why is this a priority? I think both Dr. Collier and Jennifer Wolfsey covered this in some detail, but at the end of the day, and this is not an ask that exists in a void, right? This is part of a continuum of work that's happening every day in KCPS and across the education system. So let's not pretend that we think this is a magic bullet. We think this is a piece of the puzzle. But we believe transparency and accountability are essential components to build a healthier system of schools within the KCPS landscape, to better serve our kids and our families, to center student achievement. If we don't say that 100 times, we haven't said it enough. To center student achievement, to make school decisions easier for families, and to be responsive to the Kansas City taxpayers. We need to bring each other to the table in these conversations. And there are ways that the legislation that has been kind of pending in various stages in Jefferson City can help with that process. We are not, note that we say, all publicly funded K-12 schools. We're not pointing a finger in one direction or the other. We all need to be working under the same rules. We all need to have the same opportunities. And why? Not because we want the systems to thrive, we want our kids to thrive. So with that, truly, I call this the level of the playing field, right? We've experimented throughout my lifetime in Kansas City, throughout all of our lifetimes in Kansas City, with how we make the playing field works better for some than others. How do we level the playing field for all our kids and all of our families? So I want to thank each and every one of you for the time that you've given us today. We know that your schedules are very full, particularly in the month of December, as everybody's racing towards holidays and the turn of a new year. So thank you for being here. And thank you especially to Jennifer Wolfsey for, she's really the energy of the engine of our legislative work. Thank you very much, Jen.